The drill sergeant screams in his face, "When you see the enemy, what are you going to do?" The young recruit, 18 years old, barely shaving, knows the answer he's supposed to give, but deep inside he's terrified, not just of dying, terrified of killing. This is the military's fundamental problem. Most human beings have a profound, hardwired resistance to killing other human beings. Even in combat, even when their own life is threatened, most soldiers throughout history couldn't bring themselves to pull the trigger when facing another human being at close range. During previous conflicts, military researchers discovered a shocking truth. As few as 15 to 20% of combat infantry actually fired their weapons at the enemy. The majority, 70 to 85%, would not shoot to kill even when being shot at. They would fire over enemy heads, pretend their weapons jammed, or simply freeze. The instinct not to kill another human was stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. This wouldn't work for the total conflict approaching in the 1940s. The military needed to find ways to overcome soldiers' natural resistance to killing. What they developed was a systematic psychological conditioning program that transformed how soldiers were trained and changed the men who went through it forever. The solution wasn't teaching soldiers to hate the enemy. That approach had limited success. The solution was making killing automatic, reflexive, divorced from conscious thought. The military needed to condition soldiers the way Pavlov conditioned dogs, creating responses that bypassed conscious decision-making. Previous training used bullseye targets, circles that bore no resemblance to humans. Soldiers who could hit bullseyes perfectly on the range would freeze when facing actual humans in combat. The disconnect between training and reality was too great. The new approach used human-shaped silhouette targets. Soldiers trained to shoot at representations of human forms. This desensitization began the process of making humans into targets rather than people. Making the enemy less than human was crucial to enabling killing. American propaganda portrayed Japanese soldiers as animalistic, primitive, subhuman. German soldiers were depicted as brutal automatons without individual humanity. Training films showed enemy atrocities, real and exaggerated. Soldiers were repeatedly exposed to images of enemy cruelty, creating emotional responses of hatred and disgust. The message was clear. These aren't fellow humans deserving mercy. They're monsters that must be destroyed. The dehumanization of Japanese forces was particularly extreme and explicitly racist. Training materials used slurs, depicted Japanese as vermin to be exterminated, and emphasized racial differences to create psychological distance. This made killing easier by framing it not as murder, but as pest control. This approach was morally reprehensible but psychologically effective. Soldiers who viewed enemies as less than human could kill them more easily than soldiers who recognized shared humanity. Another effective technique was portraying the enemy as existential threats to soldiers' families and homeland. The message, "You're not killing for abstract strategic objectives. You're killing to protect your mother, your sister, your girlfriend, your hometown." This reframing made killing defensive rather than aggressive. Soldiers weren't murderers, they were protectors. The enemy wasn't a victim, they were an aggressor who would harm your loved ones if not stopped. The most effective innovation was conditioning soldiers to shoot reflexively without conscious thought. Targets would pop up suddenly during training. Soldiers had 2 seconds to identify and shoot. Hit the target, it falls down, positive reinforcement. Miss or hesitate, the target stays up, negative reinforcement. This training was repeated thousands of times until shooting became automatic. See target, raise weapon, aim, fire. No thought, no hesitation, no moral consideration, just reflex. Training incorporated stress to simulate combat conditions. Explosions, smoke, shouting, chaos, all designed to create mental state similar to actual combat. Soldiers learned to perform reflexive shooting even when terrified, confused, and disoriented. The goal was making killing so automatic that it would happen even when the soldier's conscious mind was overwhelmed by fear and stress. The body would execute what training had programmed, regardless of what the mind was experiencing. Close combat training required different conditioning. Bayonet practice involved screaming while attacking human-shaped dummies. The shouting served multiple purposes, released aggression, overcame inhibitions about violence, and created psychological association between aggression and violence. Instructors encouraged soldiers to imagine the dummy as an enemy who had killed their friends, threatened their family, represented everything evil. This emotional priming made the physical act of stabbing seem justified and necessary. Perhaps the most powerful motivator wasn't hatred of the enemy, but love of fellow soldiers. Training deliberately created intense bonds between squad members. These men became brothers, closer than family in many cases. In combat, soldiers didn't fight for abstract ideals or hatred of enemies. They fought to protect their squad mates. They killed because not killing might mean their friends would die. The social pressure and loyalty to the group overcame individual resistance to killing. When a squad member was killed or wounded, the response was rage toward the enemy and determination to protect remaining squad mates. This created a cycle. Violence against the group justified violence in response, which created more casualties, which created more justification for violence. The military deliberately fostered these bonds, knowing they would motivate soldiers to kill when abstract training and propaganda might not. Shared hardship in training, exhausting marches, brutal physical conditioning, sleep deprivation created unit cohesion. Soldiers who suffered together bonded intensely. This bond became the primary motivation in combat. I'll kill to protect my brothers because they'd kill to protect me. Language was carefully controlled to create psychological distance from killing. Soldiers didn't kill people. They engaged targets or neutralized the enemy or eliminated combatants. This clinical language made killing seem like a technical task rather than moral act. Training never used words like murder or killing humans, instead eliminating the threat, destroying enemy capability, completing the mission. Language that removed humanity from the act of taking human life. Physical distance made killing easier. Artillery crews firing at targets miles away rarely thought about the humans they were killing. Bomber crews dropping bombs from 20,000 feet couldn't see individual victims. The distance, physical and psychological, enabled killing that would be impossible face to face. Infantry faced the hardest psychological challenge because they killed at ranges where they could see enemy faces, hear them scream, watch them die. This required the strongest conditioning and created the most severe psychological trauma afterward. The conditioning that made men capable of killing also damaged them psychologically. The process of overcoming natural resistance to killing, of dehumanizing enemies, of making violence reflexive, all of this created psychological wounds. Many soldiers who became effective killers through conditioning later suffered severe guilt, trauma, and moral injury. The conditioning that enabled combat effectiveness created problems that would haunt veterans for decades. Psychiatric casualties were enormous. Soldiers conditioned to kill reflexively often couldn't turn off that conditioning when combat ended. They struggled with nightmares, flashbacks, guilt, and inability to reconcile what they'd done with their pre-military moral framework. The military's conditioning had made them capable of killing, but hadn't prepared them for living with having killed. Many veterans described feeling like they'd been changed fundamentally, that the conditioning had altered who they were at a core level. They'd been transformed from civilians who couldn't kill into soldiers who could, but the transformation came at a terrible psychological price. One veteran described it, "They taught me to kill without thinking. That worked great in combat, but they never taught me how to stop being that person when I came home." The conditioning programs were devastatingly effective. By the Korean conflict and Vietnam, firing rates among American infantry had increased from 15 to 20% in previous conflicts to over 90%. The conditioning had worked. Soldiers now killed reflexively. But this effectiveness came with consequences nobody fully understood at the time. The soldiers who killed most effectively often suffered most severely afterward. Modern psychology recognizes that killing another human being, even in justified combat, creates moral injury, psychological damage from violating deeply held beliefs about right and wrong. The conditioning that enabled killing didn't prevent this injury, it just postponed it. Veterans dealing with psychological effects of combat killing often report that the conditioning broke down after combat ended. Reflexes that had enabled survival in war became sources of shame and trauma in peace. Men who had killed without hesitation in combat spent decades questioning and regretting those actions. Today, there's significant ethical debate about the conditioning process. Is it right to psychologically condition humans to overcome their natural resistance to killing? What are the long-term costs of this conditioning? How do we balance military necessity against psychological harm to individuals? These questions have no easy answers, but they're increasingly recognized as important considerations in how militaries train soldiers. Recognition of post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury has led to better support for veterans. But the fundamental tension remains. Effective military training requires conditioning that can damage psychological health. Many veterans report that after combat, they began recognizing the humanity of those they'd fought against. The dehumanization that enabled killing in combat broke down, leading to guilt and moral conflict. Enemies who had been monsters during training and combat became fellow humans in memory, making the killing harder to accept. Not all soldiers responded the same way. Some were psychologically devastated by killing, others seemed less affected. Factors included personal moral framework before military service, circumstances of killing, support systems, and individual psychological resilience. Some recruits resisted the conditioning, maintaining their moral opposition to killing despite training. These soldiers often became conscientious objectors, accepted non-combat roles, or struggled with severe conflict between conditioning and conscience during combat. Modern military training attempts to address psychological costs while maintaining combat effectiveness. This includes better screening, psychological support during service, and preparation for transition back to civilian life. But the fundamental tension between training to kill and maintaining psychological health remains. Different nations used different conditioning approaches. Some emphasized ideological commitment, others focused on group loyalty, others relied on hatred of enemy. But all faced the same fundamental challenge, overcoming human resistance to killing. The conditioning programs developed during the 1940s fundamentally changed military training worldwide. The techniques pioneered then, realistic targets, stress inoculation, reflex conditioning, remain central to modern military training. The story of how soldiers were mentally prepared to kill reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature and warfare. Humans have deep resistance to killing other humans, which makes sense evolutionarily and morally. But warfare requires overcoming this resistance. The conditioning programs that enabled combat effectiveness came at enormous psychological cost to the individuals who went through them. Many soldiers became effective killers through training, but paid for that effectiveness with decades of psychological suffering. This raises profound questions about the nature of military service, the costs we ask soldiers to bear, and our responsibilities to those we train to kill. The young recruit who arrived at basic training as a civilian left as someone fundamentally changed, conditioned to overcome the most basic human inhibition against killing. That transformation enabled military effectiveness but created psychological wounds that many carried for life. Understanding how soldiers were mentally prepared to kill requires acknowledging both the necessity that drove the conditioning and the terrible price paid by those who were conditioned. The legacy continues today. Modern soldiers receive conditioning descended directly from programs developed 80 years ago, and modern veterans still struggle with the psychological consequences of training that made them capable of killing. The techniques changed men into soldiers, but couldn't always change them back into the civilians they'd been before.